you, Jason, and thank you, Hillary. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm delighted to be speaking with Via and talking about this awful proposition and the misinformation that the proponents are putting out about Prop 13 and why it passed and how it passed and what the voters understood at the time. So let me take you back just quickly to what we had before Prop 13. Properties were assessed at market value on a regular basis, and the tax rate was a statewide average of 2.6% of the market value of a property every year. In some places 3%, in some places 1%, but a statewide average 2.67%. Now stop for just a minute and think, what would your tax bill be if it was 2.67% of the current market value of your property? Okay, start your heart again. That's why Proposition 13 passed. There was inflation and the value of property was accelerating beyond what anyone had seen before. And people were opening up their annual tax bills and literally having heart attacks. One woman dropped dead in the assessor's office. Howard Jarvis was there in the room at the time and told the story of how when she was told that she would have to pay this as a condition of keeping her home, she literally had a heart attack and collapsed right there in the assessor's office. That's why voters approved Proposition 13, and they approved it by nearly 65, 66%. It was overwhelming. And there had been several attempts to do something like this before. Howard Jarvis tried several times. The others didn't succeed, but it finally got to the point where people were just unable to survive it. And Prop 13 passed overwhelmingly. Now, before that election, the legislature decided they had to take the steam out of this somehow. Until it actually qualified for the ballot, they had always just blown it off. The money was rolling in. Sacramento was very happy with that. And all the local governments very happy with that. If everybody's taxes went up and no one had to cast an unpopular vote, that worked for the politicians. So what they did when this qualified is they put something else on the ballot, Proposition 8, same ballot, June 1978. Proposition 8 would have allowed a split roll. For the first time in California history, properties would have been divided by how they were used and taxed under different rules. And the voters rejected that. They didn't just reject it by a little less than Prop 13, so Prop 13 took effect instead. It didn't get to a majority. I think it was 46 or 47% at the best for Proposition 8. It did not get to a majority. The voters had the opportunity to split the roll and allow commercial property to be taxed at a higher rate. And they said no. So anytime you hear someone say it's a loophole that commercial property is taxed the same way residential property is, it's not a loophole. It's the way it's always been in California, and Proposition 13 did not change that. Proposition 13 decided, what it did is it changed the law so that properties were assessed when there was a change of ownership at market value. And then the maximum that they could go up in assessed value was 2% per year. It was the rate of inflation, or 2% per year. That was the maximum. So as property would go up higher than 2%, properties that were under the same ownership did not accelerate at that rate, with the result that today many properties that are long held are under market value in their assessment quite significantly. This has produced great stability for local governments, because everything else in California, all the other public revenue sources, as we've just seen, are very volatile. Sales tax, income tax, these are very volatile in how much they fall during a recession. But local governments can count on property tax revenue going up steadily every year as properties turn over, residential and commercial, and are reassessed to market value, as there's new construction and remodeling, reassessed at market value, as the basic inflation rate, 2% cap kicks in, people pay higher taxes every year in a predictable way. And nobody has a heart attack when they open their property tax bill. This is a great improvement over the previous system. But the people who would like to raise taxes find it very frustrating, because Prop 13's in the Constitution. So the legislature can't just pass some budget trailer bill and raise your taxes, or some other statute that raises taxes. Now they're constrained by Prop 13, and they can't stand it. So California has the highest income tax rate. the highest state sales tax rate, the highest gas tax rate, one of the highest corporate tax rates in the country. The only tax that's in the middle of the pack as far as per capita collections of it, property taxes. New Jersey, I think, has the distinction of the highest property taxes in the country. And I guess Sacramento just can't stand it that New Jersey's got the title, and they would like higher property taxes. The Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association has been defending Prop 13 for 42 years and will continue to defend Prop 13 and California taxpayers from this assault on their wallets. Property taxes are not like other taxes. Income tax, you only pay if you have income. Sales tax, you only pay if you're buying something, once on the way in, once on the way out. Capital gains tax when you choose to sell, but property tax every year as a condition of keeping what you already own. That's very different. And raising property taxes tied to a factor that no one can control, the market value of real estate and how much it goes up, that is very abusive. And it will certainly drive businesses out of the state, big businesses and small businesses. So let's talk about what this initiative does, the Schools and Communities First Initiative, or whatever it ends up being called. This is the split roll initiative. It splits the property tax roll into residential and non-residential. It excludes certain properties that are commercial, industrial. It excludes apartment buildings. Those are on the residential side. It excludes agricultural land, and it tries to exclude small businesses, and I'll explain what it does. The agricultural land exclusion is a little bit misleading because while the land is excluded from assessment under this, the buildings are not. So barns, wineries, all these sorts of buildings will be reassessed to market value. So it does have an impact on farms and ranches. It will affect prices to the consumer. In fact, this entire measure will affect prices to the consumer and also job creation, because right now companies can predict their property tax bill, but if this measure passes, it's an unpredictable cost. It's a variable cost, and companies have to take that into account in their planning. So this would reassess to market value commercial and industrial properties, every shopping mall, every car dealership, every factory, every office building, every supermarket, movie theater, self-storage facility, every sort of commercial or industrial property would be reassessed to market value every 3 years. Painful. The tax rate would continue to be 1% unless they come at us again to change that, which they could. But at the moment, the tax rate would be 1%. So let's talk about the small business exclusions that they've tried to put into place. You may have read that the California Assessors Association came out against this initiative. They called it impossible to implement as written. And this is the reason that it's impossible. What it tries to do is exclude properties that are worth $3 million or less. But they don't want to exclude properties that are $3 million or less if that's only one of the properties in the portfolio and it's really a big business. So what they tried to do to prevent that so-called loophole is they wrote language that says where none of the entity's owners have a cumulative fair market value in excess of $3 million. And then they put in something to adjust that every 2 years by a floating inflation factor to be set at the county level. So what an assessor would have to do to figure out whether a small strip mall or property in a rural area is excluded under $3 million is they would have to look into the ownership. They would have to see whether any of the owners of the entity own anything else and what county it's in and what the inflation factor is for that county. There's no database that produces this information. They don't have any way of producing this information. So what would the staff have to do? How many people would it take to go through every commercial property and figure out who owns it, which is possibly a moving target as that changes, and have to figure out all of these other inflation factors county by county? It's unworkable. Something else that's unworkable is there's a deferral period before the small businesses have to pay the higher taxes. But In order to get the deferral until 2025, it has to have 50% or more of the occupied square footage occupied by small businesses as defined. Well, there again, now you're looking at every tenant of every strip mall to figure out how many employees they have. It's unworkable. The truth of this matter is, for all this nonsense about we're excluding small businesses, what they're actually doing is hitting small businesses that lease space. If you lease space and you have a triple net lease, then you are paying insurance, maintenance, and property taxes on that property. So the small business that rents space in the strip mall or the commercial building will be hit with the higher property tax bill that is levied on the big business that owns the property. And there's no way around that. What the proponents say is, oh, no big deal. They can always find another location. Well, that's a fine thing for bureaucrats to say. You've got an established business and it's in a location and it has a customer base, and the property tax bill comes and the proponent's answer is, well, shop around. As if everybody else's property taxes haven't gone up too. They don't have an answer for this. This is a serious, serious flaw. Most small businesses do lease their spaces, and they will be paying these higher property taxes, and it will put them out of business. Because in California, costs are already high, taxes are already high, workers' comp, minimum wage, all of these costs of operating have been going up. And this, I think you could truthfully name this last nail in the coffin and put that on the ballot, and that would pass a legal test for truthfulness, because this is ruinous for small businesses to raise their prices this way. It's going to hurt job creation. It's going to hurt consumer prices, supermarkets, everything that anyone buys is coming from a business that will be paying higher property taxes in California if this passes. It would be catastrophic. The cost of implementation, according to the assessors, for the first 3 years would be more than $1 billion, $1 billion. So whatever this is going to raise, $1 billion comes off the top to pay for just implementing it. And the staffing issues of who's going to implement it, also very serious. One of the things this does is it creates more opportunities for people to appeal their assessments, because in all likelihood, with all the properties that have to be reassessed, there will be some sort of a computerized mass reassessment to figure it out, because they don't have enough people to go out to each property 1/3 each year in the state and figure it out manually. It takes 5 years to train a commercial assessor, and they don't have those people. So they're going to do some kind of a computerized mass assessment, and businesses will have the right to appeal. And when they appeal, they'll have lawyers, and the lawyers will hire who? Commercial assessors as experts to figure out what the assessment truly should be. And the assessment is based on the income to the business in part. So what has happened in the last 3-4 months with the COVID-19 lockdowns is that commercial businesses have a new valuation, and we don't know what it is. How much office space is too much? How many restaurants can be ghost kitchens instead of dining rooms? How many vacant spaces are there going to be in shopping malls when everybody's on Amazon? Nobody knows. So the valuations could go down instead of up. So no one really knows how much this would raise. And if the valuations go down, everybody's entitled to a Proposition 8 decline in value reassessment, not the original Proposition 8 from 1978, but a later one. You're entitled to a decline in value reassessment if the value of your property is less than the assessed value on your bill. Well, now you're doing appeals and reassessments every year for all the properties in California if there's a recession and values decline. It's unmanageable. It's unworkable. It will just tie up all the resources of the county in fighting over assessments instead of the current system, which is predictable and simple and produces increasing revenue every year, which schools and local governments can depend upon. It replaces that with this volatile, crazy train wreck. And if it doesn't raise as much money as they think they need, What's next? What's next? Well, could be apartment buildings, could be large businesses that own apartment buildings, could be homes over a certain value, could be second homes. There's really no limit to how many axe hits you can take at Prop 13 if you're out to destroy it. And at the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, we think they're out to destroy it. We think they are out to remove taxpayer protections. One of the things in Prop 13 that has been under assault, Jason mentioned ACA 1. That's one of several that have been tried to go after the 2/3 vote that's needed to pass local taxes. Prop 13 requires a 2/3 vote to pass special taxes for a specific purpose. ACA 1 would drop that to 55% for everything that is infrastructure. What's infrastructure? What isn't infrastructure? Everything the government does practically is some sort of infrastructure. So what it would mean is that local governments could put new taxes on the ballot, and instead of needing 67% to pass, they would pass with 55%. And many more of them would pass, and they would go on the property tax bill in many cases. And then every time you get your bill, you open the envelope, it's higher and higher and higher. Now that's already been done for school bonds, and many more of them have passed. And people open their property tax bill and they say, why is this so high? What did we see in March in the primary? Voters said, enough of this. They turned down a statewide school bond, Proposition 13, named by coincidence, Proposition 13. It was a $15 billion school bond, and it failed. And that's the first time one of these has failed since, I think, the 1990s. They always pass. But the voters said no. And they also said no to 60%, according to Caltax, 60% of the local taxes and bonds that were on the March ballot. Unprecedented. Rejection of higher taxes in unprecedented numbers before the COVID-19 unemployment and all the economic chaos it caused. So now, how does it look? Asking the voters for tax increases. Not so good from their side. And the governor has made reference to this. He spoke when he talked about his May revision of the budget. He talked about having a conversation statewide about what's appropriate to put in front of the voters as far as tax increases. Perhaps the split roll will be withdrawn from the ballot. Now, I have no inside information on this, but it is legally possible until I think June 25th that the proponents could pull this measure off the ballot, and the legislature could pass something else with a 2/3 vote in each house and put that legislatively referred constitutional amendment on the ballot instead. That's possible. What would that deal look like potentially, hypothetically? Well, it could take into account other types of business taxes, such as a sales tax on services, which has been kicking around in the legislature. It could change what's in this current split roll measure and revise some of these small business provisions again. It could include apartment buildings. This is all hypothetical, but it's legally possible that the legislature could do something like this in a back room very quickly, put it on the ballot, and we would be facing an entirely new measure. So that's something to watch, because as I said, the governor has hinted at it. I have not heard that this is happening at this point, and I anticipate that this particular split roll measure will be on the ballot, but that until that deadline passes, it's still possible. And we have seen in Sacramento some of these gut and amend types of actions where things change very quickly. So be on the lookout for that. And I think I covered everything I had here. If you'd like to fight the split roll with us, you can join the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, hjta.org. Click the button for Support the Campaign to Protect Proposition 13. Sign up for a yard sign. And if you'd like to volunteer or you'd like to contribute to the campaign, we will be doing radio and some other things to fight the split roll. And there is another campaign that's being run by the Business Roundtable and the Chamber of Commerce. Various commercial real estate businesses are running a separate campaign, of course, and they are going to put significant resources into television advertising, and this will be opposed very vigorously. This is not going to slip through unnoticed. An attack on Proposition 13 is always a bad idea politically, and an attack that raises taxes on anybody is particularly ill-timed right now. So happy to take your questions.
I have a question. This is Marsha Bruce Bush, who specifically would vote for this proposition?
Well, it's being backed by the teachers union and all the public employee unions and everybody who likes to raise taxes. So it's being backed. I don't think the governor has backed it, but it's been backed by a number of lawmakers. The mayor of Los Angeles backs it. People who want taxes to go up, people who are paid by tax money instead of paying tax money, they are in favor of this. It's been a long-standing project trying to, the proponents say it's unfair, that businesses aren't paying their fair share. But businesses, as we all know, don't pay taxes directly. They pay taxes, it's a pass-through from the customers to the government. It's businesses can't produce money out of the air. It comes from passing through the costs. And it does cost jobs and it does raise prices. So the people who want to advocate for this are not always considering their rank and file members who are going to be paying more for this. So I don't know that there's much of a constituency in terms of voters for something like this. Polls are showing that it doesn't do that well. Even when it's explained as favorably as possible, it barely gets to 50%.
Wonderful. Marsha, thank you. Susan, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. I'm thoroughly depressed.
I'm sorry.
I'll just be easy. We've had a number of questions come in, so I'll just start running down the list if you don't mind.
Sure.
The first one we had here is they'd like to know how is the proposition going to be worded in the voting guide? And the second part of that was how long would it be until it goes into effect, if it were to pass?
That goes into effect, I think it depends on how big your business is. I think it goes into effect in 2021 or 2022. Let me see if I have that exact number here. I think I do. But it doesn't go into effect immediately. It goes into effect in a couple of years. And then if you're a small business or most of your tenants are small businesses, 2025 is the date. And what was the first part of the question?
They wanted to know how the wording was going to be in the voter guide.
Okay. This is a subject of potential litigation because everybody knows what happened with the gas tax deal and how tricky it was worded, that it stops road repair or something. It doesn't say anything about tax increase. It says stops road repair. If the Attorney General writes something like that for this, currently it's called increases funding for schools. If that's on the ballot language, there will be litigation. The coalition has an attorney that has already sent a letter saying if it's misleading, there will be litigation over that ballot language. So we don't really know what it's going to be called, and we don't know what number it's going to be yet, but you'll be hearing plenty about it.
Okay, great. And then next question we had here was, there's always the concern, and you touched on it briefly, about this may be just the beginning. Once you hit commercial properties, perhaps they move on to apartment buildings, et cetera. Have you heard any rumblings of that already being discussed? Oh, am I muted? No, I'm okay.
Everything is frozen. And it says my internet connection is unstable.
Oh.
We can
I'm
hear
here.
you, Susan.
Yeah, you're hearing me okay, Kathy?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes, you
Susan,
can
we
hear
heard
me.
you.
Can you hear Jason's question, Susan, or are you just kind of locked up? Sounds like she can't hear us.
Try my phone connection. Can you hear me? You can hear me. Okay, if you type the question, I'll answer it.
All right, I'll start typing.
See, I'm clicking the chat button.
Okay.
Okay.
Everybody forgive my spelling. I'll try to type quick.
I can't hear you, Jason, but I'm looking at the chat and I see questions from Rebecca and Kim and Lucas and not a question from Lucas. What would you like me to answer? Can you type it on the chat?
Susan, can you hear me?
Okay, just work my way down the chat list. Patty, I'm showing that you're muted. Okay, I'm going to answer the last question here, which I see from Ed. What is the current thought or speculation on how Prop 13 is being received and talked about in terms of possible voter willingness or confusion to vote for it? Would Prop 13 only need a simple majority to pass or more than that? Okay, let me try to clarify. This is not Proposition 13 on the ballot. This is going to have a different number. And the measure that was on the March ballot that was called Proposition 13 is dead. That's over. That was a bond measure, not directly tied to property taxes. That's dead. So let's call this Proposition XX or the split roll. And what it would take is a simple majority, because a constitutional amendment only needs a simple majority from the electorate. Anything that is introduced from the legislature for the ballot needs a 2/3 for a constitutional amendment. It needs a 2/3 in the Assembly and a 2/3 in the Senate. But once it's on the ballot, it only needs a simple majority. So that makes me concerned in terms of some of the election issues that we're going to have this fall. Any concerns that anyone has about election security are magnified when you've got something of this financial significance on the ballot in November, and we're changing a lot of the procedures. So that's a separate issue. So what is the current probability that it will pass? I intend to stop it personally. So I make it 100% that it doesn't pass. They got to go through me. That's that. Okay. If Prop 8 is in play now and current values decline, do they not currently have the structure in place to accommodate the reassessments? Yes, the structure is in place to accommodate the reassessments. The way it usually works, if there's a widespread recession and it affects a lot of businesses, the counties will often do a computerized mass reassessment to a lower level. And then they go up when the market recovers and people start getting those higher property tax bills back up to what it would have been, still constrained by Prop 13, but what it would have been if it hadn't had the decline in value reassessment. So many times people get those and they say, well, my property hasn't gone up this much, and they appeal. And the appeals very often get backlogged. And counties like Los Angeles, which are so large, very often have a long backlog and long delays on appeals. So the idea of increasing that even more by reassessing commercial property every 3 years is, it makes the assessors go pale to think about that, which is why they have come out against it. And the $1 billion in implementation costs does not include the costs of the ancillary agencies like the county council and the controller and the tax collector. They will also have higher costs, and the implementation costs there are not reimbursable apparently. So that's just a budget cost to the state of California, to the taxpayers. Okay. What's the most effective way to counter the campaign in favor of split roll in order to make the general public, who may not properly understand the devastating effects, that's for sure it would have, in order for people to become properly educated on the realities of the proposition? How to make people care about split roll and the potential domino effects that would end up ultimately affecting them? Well, here's what you can tell them. Tell them the taxes go up on every business that employs people and every business that they shop at. And it means pressure on jobs and pressure on prices. And there's no way around that. There's no exclusion for preventing higher prices. There's no price control mechanism built into this. If the taxes go up on a supermarket, it will be passed through in the prices at the supermarket. There's no way around it. How to get people's attention? You can certainly tell them that an attack on Proposition 13 is an attack on property owners. And first it's this group of property owners, and next it could be your group of property owners. There's another measure on the fall ballot that affects inherited property and repeals Proposition 58. But Proposition 58 passed with 75.7% of the vote. And yet, this measure, which is sponsored by the California Association of Realtors, which tries to create portability for older homeowners so they can move without higher property taxes, pays for it by reassessing inherited property to market value, which is a big change from a current law, which is Proposition 58. It repeals Proposition 58. So this is an example of how many different ways there are to raise taxes on property owners. No to all of it. No to tax increases. We are taxed enough in California. Businesses have enough to deal with without higher property taxes. How is it legal for these people to write such misleading proposition descriptions and run misleading TV ads? Aren't there laws against that? That's an interesting question. Is it legal for the Attorney General to write something misleading? According to the Court of Appeals in the state of California, this is from the gas tax. If you remember, Travis Allen had a petition also to repeal the gas tax. He went to court. He got one of these terrible title and summaries from the Attorney General, went to court, won in the district court, and then the state appealed, and the appeals court ruled for the Attorney General and said, this is within the powers of the Attorney General to write something completely misleading. We don't agree with it, but that's his job. If you want to fix that, the answer is legislation, a potential constitutional amendment to give this title and summary responsibility to the nonpartisan legislative analyst's office. They should write the title and summary. They write the summary anyway that's in the ballot argument. So they should write the title and summary that appears at the top. But at the moment, it's the Attorney General, and that's a partisan office. And so that's the law, according to the appeals court. What was the rest of that question? The TV ads. The answer on the TV ads is the First Amendment pretty much protects anything anyone wants to say, whether it's misleading or not. And as long as they do all the disclosures of who's paying for it, the FPPC doesn't police the content of whether it's accurate or not. So that's just on us, the opponents, to say that's not accurate. And it is asymmetric warfare because the unions will spend a lot of money trying to put out the message that this is a wonderful thing and that businesses are not paying their fair share, which isn't true. However, what you saw with the March election with Proposition 13 was asymmetric warfare on the part of taxpayers that defeated all that money. And the way that that was done was with a $250,000 radio campaign by the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association and a lot of interviews. And that was it. And it defeated a $10 million campaign that was backed by everybody else. It was backed by business groups and backed by unions and backed by politicians, backed by the governor. Governor went up and down the state posing for pictures at schools, talking about changing the air conditioning ducts and how important it was. But with a $250,000 radio campaign, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association pointed out that this was too much debt and that this was going to allow property taxes at the local level to go up because one of the things that was in it was lifting the caps on how much the school districts can borrow. So they could issue more bonds, put it on your local property tax bill, make your tax bill go up. Plus the fact that something like $45 billion in borrowing has already been approved for the same purpose. Get rid of the asbestos, get rid of the lead pipes, and they haven't fixed it yet. So what's going on? And just by pointing that out, we were able to defeat a $10 million campaign. So it can be done. It can be done. The voters just need to know how it affects them. And the way this affects them is higher prices and fewer jobs. Companies will leave California. Google, even Google, as wealthy as that company is, as successful as it is, they have built a $1 billion campus in New York. And so has Facebook. Why? You tell me why. You tell me. Because they could see this coming down Wilshire Boulevard, or the comparable street in the Silicon Valley to Wilshire Boulevard. They could see this coming, and they are ready to turn off the lights and leave. Now, I'm not saying that they will, but they could. Why wouldn't they? They own a lot of property, and it's going to be reassessed to market value every 3 years. Nobody wants that. Even though the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which is the fundraising arm of the Facebook family, they are backing this initiative. I'm not sure why. Maybe they're currying favor with the governor for something else, but they are backing this initiative. It would be devastating to a business that owns property in the Bay Area. Incredibly expensive. And even the smallest kiosk in a shopping mall, even the smallest kiosk that sells jewelry before the holidays, is going to see a rent increase when a big company like Westfield is reassessed to market value for all these properties that they've owned for a long time. How can they not? What are we doing to retail with something like this? What are we doing to restaurants that are already going under? Even before the COVID thing, they were going under, and now they are really hurting. And now there's all this debt and all these employees who have lost their jobs. Some of those jobs are not coming back. And what are we doing? Raising property taxes on all these landlords, which will be passed through to all these tenants. It's going to be devastating. It's a giant tax increase on every business in California simultaneously. How does that help us? How does that help us? It's so reckless. It's so dangerous. I hope the voters will see that. I think they will. Next question. What is the obligation of the property owners during the appeal process? Are owners required to pay the new higher rate and hope that they can appeal? I believe they are. I believe you have to pay it when it's due. Otherwise, it becomes delinquent and you accrue penalties. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not absolutely sure, but I believe you owe it when it's billed to you. And if you're appealing and you win, it's refunded. I think that's how that works. What are the estimated costs of being able to defeat split roll in November? I'm not sure. I think I've heard the number $40 million is what the coalition is trying to raise to do this. And undoubtedly they'll be able to. It's every business in California, so there will be some money there. One of the things that concerns the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association is if the businesses are split off, let's say this, heaven forbid, is approved. Well, now if proponents of higher taxes want to come after the homeowners, now you have fewer wealthy people who are affected by it. You have homeowners who are already in financial trouble and aren't going to have a lot of money to donate. But as I said, I think you can defeat this with asymmetric warfare, because once you tell people it's a tax increase, you take away all of that soft talk about classrooms and getting the asbestos out of the ceiling, which they should have done 40 years ago. Once you stop talking about that and you start talking about the cost of it and the consequences of it, people see it right away. So you don't really need to send out 1,000 flyers to every household and explain, how pretty it's going to be, because you just say this is a tax increase and people immediately get that. Okay, let's see. Other than Howard Jarvis, what other organizations have committed financial resources? The Business Roundtable, the California Chamber of Commerce. You can see the coalition is called Californians to Stop Higher Property Taxes. And I think if you look up Fight for Prop 13, I think that's their website, fightforprop13.com, I believe in. And then you can see the latest coalition and the latest fundraising numbers. On the Secretary of State's site or the FPPC site, you can see the reports on who's donating. It will be very significant. Did I miss any questions here? Written information and flyers. Go to hjta.org, click the button, for Support the Campaign to Protect Prop 13, and you'll see our downloadable flyer, What is Split Roll and Why Should I Be Terrified of It? That's the title. And you can download that PDF and distribute it to everybody by email, and print it out, hand it out, put it in your businesses on the tables and the counters. Let everybody know this is coming. Although I have to tell you, everybody's going to know. This is not going to go quietly. Everybody's going to know about this. And let's see. I'm sorry about these technical problems. Property owners moving out of state and the connection to the trickle-down taxation. So yes, people are moving out of state. This, for the first time in this upcoming census and redrawing of the district lines, the redistricting, California is on track to lose a congressional seat for the first time in its history. Going all the way back to the gold rush, our population has never done anything but grow. And we are on track to lose a congressional seat because people are leaving. And as you probably know, we have this very progressive tax code, and the personal income tax hits the highest income earners much, much harder than anybody else. The top tax rate is 13.3%. And if those people who are paying 13.3% want lower income taxes and they want to move to another state, they have 49 other choices. And if enough of them leave, it's a big hit on the general fund, because it's a very small number of people who are really funding about half to 2/3 of the general fund with their personal income tax. If they leave, it's a big deal. So it's certainly, if the businesses leave and the high paying jobs leave, then you lose the corporate tax, you lose the income tax, you lose the sales tax for all the stuff those people were buying. And then what? And then what? So now we do all of this with this measure. We create this train wreck of implementation for the assessor's offices and all of these lawsuits and all of these costs, and it doesn't even end up raising what they think it's going to raise. Then what? Then what? Well, what I would like to do is write up a new initiative and come at them 10 times harder with even more protections for taxpayers, which I won't detail at this time. However, that can be done too. Let's say this were to pass. Let's say they were to come after residential property next. It's not impossible to qualify a rival initiative that creates far stronger protections and lower taxes. That's possible. And put that out for signatures and put that on the ballot, and let's see what the voters want to do. Prop 13, if you remember it, was so violently opposed by everyone in government. Every county was writing up these plans of how terrible everything was going to be if the voters made this terrible mistake of approving Prop 13. It was so extreme. There's actually a Tonight Show episode with Johnny Carson where he did a desk spot just before the June 6th election, making fun of the crazy, wild, exaggerated claims of disaster that were going to happen if Prop 13 passed. And let me just say one thing about the education spending numbers. If you go to, I think it's nces.org, you can see what the US government says, the Department of Education says, is the actual per pupil spending for California adjusted in today's dollars. And it went from something like $5,000 or $7,000 back in the 1970s to about $11,500 in the most recent numbers. Constant dollars. It's gone up virtually every year with a slight dip for the 2009 recession. Per pupil spending in California in constant dollars has gone up every year. In order to get these numbers where it says, oh, California is way down at the bottom, what they do is they use an inflation cost of living adjustment. They say, well, it's more expensive to live in California, therefore the per pupil spending is lower than it looks. Well, if you do that kind of math, then this measure doesn't help because this raises the cost of living. So the per pupil spending would actually go down if you're going to do this same statistical game. the cost of living goes higher, the per pupil spending goes lower by this math adjustment, not in real dollars. So this is a game. This is all about the unions wanting to have more funding for new contracts and trying to raise taxes to pay for it because the money isn't there. That's what's going on here. Okay, let's see.
I think we have time to take one or two more questions.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
We find Susan and let her know. In my list, I can't find her.
I don't see any new questions. Have I missed anything? Type it at the bottom if I've missed anything.
Okay,
Okay.
we're good? All right.
Thank you, Hillary.
You're welcome. Thank you, Susan. I'm going to thank Susan. I don't think Susan can hear us, but we'll reach out to her I'm going to text her, and if everybody can thank her through chat, that would be fantastic. Thank you all for being here today. Kathy has a few updates and some dates.
Thank you very much. I'll sign off if you don't need me.
Thank you so much, Susan. And thank you also, Jason, for moderating and everyone that's on. Just a few reminders about upcoming events. VIA's the third annual State of the State is scheduled for July 7th. It's a Tuesday. It'll start at 11:30, and we'll be hosting Senator Scott Wilk and Assemblywoman Christy Smith. So we hope those of you who are here today will also log in for that event. We also have upcoming and just scheduled on Monday, August 3rd, we're going to have a special presentation from Congressman Mike Garcia about his first 60 days in office. Both of those are available through the calendar at via.org. So we hope that you'll register for those. Thank you so much, everyone who logged in today. There were a couple of good links to the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. And then I think Teresa shared the Fight for Proposition 13 on there as well. You might want to jot those links down, but we'll also send them out to follow. Anyway, thank you to all of you. I hope you got as much out of the presentation as I did. I think she was exceptional. So hopefully we will see you back for the next event.
Thank you, everybody. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you, ladies. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
And don't forget Breakfast Club on Friday, July 10th, please.
I'm sorry, Teresa, I forgot that. I apologize. Yes, that'll go out this afternoon too, so it should be in all your mailboxes.
It'll be on our calendar, so make sure you check it out.